Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on, well, a massive topic, really getting into the weeds of the Soviet-German conflict on the Eastern Front.
Yeah, a conflict that really shaped so much the 20th century. An absolutely enormous undertaking.
Absolutely. And we're not just recounting battles here. We want to track the thinking, right?
Yeah.
From those revolutionary theories back in the 1930s to the absolute catastrophe of 1941 and then, the big showdown at Kursk in 43.
Exactly. This wasn't just about numbers, though the scale is staggering. It was a conceptual battlefield, too. Doctrines were tested, broken, and rebuilt under immense pressure.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to get past that simple idea of German tech versus Soviet numbers.
Right. We want to uncover the strategic pivots, the doctrinal arguments, the tech shifts that really forced both sides into these brutal, rapid adaptations.
We want you to walk away with a much deeper feel for why it all unfolded the way it did.
Yeah, real understanding.
Okay, so to help us navigate this, we've got some foundational sources, key texts.
We do. We're leaning heavily on folks like Georgy Isserson. His work, The Evolution of Operational Art, is, well, seminal. And then researchers like Dr. Jacob Kipp and David Mills, who've traced how the Red Army developed these ideas.
Okay, so that's the Soviet theory side.
Then for the brutal reality of 41, we're looking at David Glantz's Barbarossa, Jonathan House's work on the invasion, too. And importantly, Robert Kershaw's concept of being victored to death, Pegsiegen, which really nails the German logistical problems.
That's a powerful phrase. And then for 1943?
Kursk. We'll use Jonathan House again, his Waiting for the Panther. It really ties together the doctrine, the tech, the sheer scale of that battle.
So it's a full circle, really. Idea to brutal practice to this massive material clash.
That's the plan.
Okay, let's start back in the USSR interwar period. These thinkers in the Red Army, they're cooking up something called operational art. How should we picture that? Where does it fit?
Well, think of it like a bridge. You've got tactics down at the bottom. That's the specific fight, taking a hill, crossing a river, battalion-level stuff.
Right.
Then way up top, you have strategy. That's the big picture. National goals, winning the whole war, politics, economics, everything.
Okay.
Operational art is the crucial middle layer. It's about planning and running a whole campaign, a sequence of battles and maneuvers.
So linking tactical wins together for a bigger purpose.
Precisely. To achieve a specific, often decisive strategic goal within a theater of operations.
Got it.
Georgy Isserson, who we mentioned, he defined it as the, totality of maneuvers and battles in a given part of a theater, directed toward the achievement of the common goal.
Okay.
And he saw, based on World War I, that future war wouldn't be just lining up shoulder to shoulder anymore.
Trenches, deadlock.
Exactly. He realized war was moving into depth. He actually wrote it would be a vast sea of fire and combat, blazing through the entire depths of the enemy setup.
Wow. That's a huge conceptual leap. From a line to the whole space.
Absolutely. And that gave birth to what they call deep strategy. You're not just hitting the front line, you're hitting everything behind it simultaneously. Reserves, commands, supply, all of it.
Shattering the whole system.
That was the idea. And this new thinking led to a really fierce debate inside the Red Army's intellectual circles.
The big clash between Svitchin and Tukhachevsky.
That's the one. It really set the stage for the Red Army's development. Andrei Svitchin, he was the cautious one, the realist.
Okay.
He looked at Russia's geography, huge, vulnerable borders, its economy still developing, and he argued for attrition. Ismore, they called it.
Wear them down.
Exactly. Prepare for a long war. He warned very strongly against any short war illusion. For Svitchin, survival was key. Exhaust the enemy over time.
Makes sense given Russia's history and size. But Tukhachevsky, he had a different vision.
Oh, completely different. Mikhail Tukhachevsky was the firebrand, the champion of the offensive. His strategy was annihilation. So Khrushchev.
Total destruction.
Yes. He believed the next war wouldn't just be nation versus nation, but a revolutionary class war. Unprecedented intensity.
So it demanded a decisive knockout blow.
Right. He pushed relentlessly for mechanizing these deep operations. Kipp and Mills detail this really well. He envisioned these powerful combined arms forces.
What did that look like?
Long-range tanks, mounted infantry, artillery, aviation, and airborne forces, all punching deep, working together to break the enemy's structure.
So Tukhachevsky's deep operation, it wasn't just about being aggressive, it was technologically advanced for its time. Mass, mobility, firepower.
You've got it. He was actually aware of, and is somewhat critical of, early German ideas about mobile warfare. He thought, yeah, they might have professional mobile units, but a mass army.
A Soviet mass army.
Deploying more tanks, more planes, more mechanized troops, properly coordinated, would ultimately crush them. It was about combining that mobility with overwhelming scale.
And this thinking actually became official doctrine.
It did. By 1936, the deep operation concept was written into the Red Army field regulations. Intellectually, you could argue it was ahead of what most Western armies were thinking.
Which makes what happened next even more tragic. The purges. Starting in 37. How badly did Stalin's paranoia kneecap the Red Army right when they developed this sophisticated idea?
Catastrophically. It's hard to overstate it. A self-inflicted wound on a massive scale. David Mills gives figures, maybe 20–35% of the entire officer corps gone.
That's staggering.
And it gets worse higher up. And these weren't just bodies.
These are the guys who understood the doctrine.
Precisely. The architects like Tukhachevsky himself, the trainers, the thinkers who actually grasped the nuances of deep battle and operational art.
So it wasn't just losing people, it was losing the idea, the institutional knowledge.
Absolutely. The purges effectively killed the doctrine, at least temporarily. Talking about deep operations became dangerous, politically suspect. So doctrinal development just stopped. Evaluation froze. Fast forward to June 1941, Barbarossa hits.
Yeah.
And something like 75% of Soviet corps commanders had been in their jobs for less than a year.
Less than a year, in charge of these massive formations.
Imagine. You're maybe used to commanding a regiment, suddenly you're responsible for a mechanized corps with thousands of men, tanks, artillery, and you've got panzers pouring over the border.
Terrifying.
So what do? They default to what's simple, what feels safe. Caution. Linear defense. Attrition. They basically abandoned the sophisticated maneuver concepts Tukhachevsky had championed.
So the blueprint for deep battle existed.
Yes.
But the trained architects and builders were gone just when they were needed most.
Exactly. The tools were there, but the hands trained to use them had been cut off.
Which leads us right into that summer, June 22nd, 1941. Germany launches Barbarossa. They're confident their way of war, their operational art, what we often call Blitzkrieg, maybe a bit inaccurately.
Yeah, it's a complex term.
They thought this would deliver that quick knockout. The annihilation Tukhachevsky had theorized about, ironically, what was the actual German plan?
Well, the core idea was indeed annihilation. Rapid, decisive encirclement battles. Glantz and House lay this out clearly. The objective was to destroy the main body of the Red Army very quickly, very close to the border.
Why the rush? Why near the border?
To prevent the Soviets from doing exactly what they eventually did, mobilize their massive reserves from deep inside the country, they had to win before that potential manpower could be brought to bear.
Okay. An Army Group Center was the main effort.
Yes, the central thrust. Driving deep, aiming to link up their panzer groups, their mechanized spearheads, around key cities like Minsk, trapping huge Soviet forces.
And these panzer groups, were they the unstoppable force we sometimes imagine?
That's where the picture gets complicated. The Germans actually made a decision before the invasion. They spread the tanks thinner. To create more panzer divisions overall, 19 of them for the massive front. But as Glantz points out, this meant each division had fewer tanks, averaging maybe 125 operational tanks each.
Not as concentrated as you might think.
Not really. And the bigger issue, the one that really undermines the whole Blitzkrieg image, the vast majority of the German army, the Austere, wasn't mechanized at all.
What was it then?
It was marching, on foot, and supplied by horses.
Horses? We talking a few or?
We're talking, according to House's research, over 600,000 horses.
600,000.
Yes, over 80% of the Army's logistics and most of the infantry divisions relied on horses and boots on the ground.
That completely changes the picture. This reliance on horses, the foot-slogging infantry, that ties into Robert Kershaw's work, doesn't it? His idea of Totzigen, victored to death.
Exactly. The German logistics were fundamentally flawed for the sheer scale and distances of the Soviet Union. Kershaw really highlights this with the concept of the 500-kilometer tripwire.
Explain that. What's the tripwire?
It's roughly the distance at which motorized logistics trucks carrying fuel, ammo, food start to become less efficient than relying on railways. Beyond 500 kilometers or so, the trucks are consuming almost as much fuel just getting supplies to the front as they're delivering. You need functioning rail lines.
But the Soviet rail lines were different, wider gauge.
Correct. So the Germans had to constantly convert the tracks as they advanced, which took time, resources, engineers. It was a huge bottleneck.
So once the panzers got about 500 kilometers in,
they started running out of steam, literally. Low on fuel, low on ammo, vehicles breaking down. They were forced to pause. The spearheads outran their own supply lines.
And the supply system itself wasn't exactly efficient either, was it?
Oh, it was a disaster. House points out they invaded with something like 2,000 different types of motor vehicles.
2,000? How?
Captured French trucks, Czech cars, Belgian lorries, everything they'd scooped up conquering Europe. Imagine trying to stock spare parts for that mess.
Impossible.
Pretty much. Mechanics were constantly stripping parts from broken vehicles just to keep others running. Cannibalization became standard practice.
Even in the elite units?
Even the elite units. Kershaw notes that even the SS Panzergrenadier Division, Leibstandarte, Hitler's own bodyguard division, went into Russia with vehicles already worn down from France and the Balkans.
So these pauses, forced by the 500-kilometer tripwire and the breakdown of supplies, how did that directly impact the operations, the encirclements?
It meant the traps didn't fully close or didn't close quickly enough. The panzers would make these spectacular breakthroughs, encircling hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops around Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. Huge victories on paper. But as House explains, the panzers were too few and spread too thin to actually hold the perimeter of these vast pockets effectively while they waited for the supplies and for the infantry.
The slow-moving, horse-drawn infantry.
Exactly. They had to march hundreds of kilometers to catch up and properly seal the pocket in that gap, that time lag.
Soviet soldiers slipped through.
Tens, even hundreds of thousands managed to filter out. Critically, this often included experienced officers, political commissars, technicians. The people needed to rebuild the Red Army. They escaped the initial trap.
So the victories were incomplete, operationally flawed.
Deeply flawed. They weren't delivering the final annihilation blow the Germans needed.
And the cost of even those flawed victories. This is the victor-to-death part, the human cost.
Staggering and completely unsustainable for the short war they'd planned. By mid-August 41, just 6 weeks in, they'd lost nearly 390,000 men. That's over 11% of the invasion force.
Wow.
By November, as the advance ground to a halt outside Moscow, the figure was up to 686,000 casualties. That's a fifth of the entire force committed. Gone.
A fifth, but you're saying the numbers, as bad as they were, weren't even the worst part.
In many ways, no. The truly crippling loss, the one Kershaw really emphasizes, was in the experienced leadership cadre, the officers and the senior NCOs.
Why were those losses so disproportionately damaging?
Because these were the men trained in the German way of war, particularly Auftragstechnik Mission Command.
Explain that briefly.
It's about decentralized command, giving junior leaders the objective, the intent, and trusting them to figure out how to achieve it, adapting to the situation on the ground without waiting for orders. It requires initiative, flexibility, understanding the bigger picture.
Okay, very adaptable.
Highly adaptable. But these highly trained, adaptable leaders were being killed and wounded at incredibly high rates. Kershaw calculates that by the time they reached Moscow, the German army had lost the equivalent officer strength of about 37 divisions.
37 divisions worth of experienced leaders. Gone.
Gone. The replacements coming up, they were often less experienced, trained more rigidly, less capable of that kind of flexible, independent action.
So the army's brain, its conceptual advantage, was being damaged.
Exactly. The very thing that made the German army so effective in 1940, its speed of decision-making, its adaptability at the operational level, was bleeding out on the Russian steppe in 1941. They won battles, yes, but they were being victored to death, losing the very quality that made them win.
Okay, so the German operational machine starts to sputter due to logistics and these horrific losses. But that sputtering, that slowing down, it gave the Soviets something vital, didn't it? It bought them time.
Crucial time.
Right.
And it exposed one of the biggest German failures of the entire war, their intelligence assessment. They fundamentally misunderstood the Soviet Union's capacity to endure and regenerate.
They underestimated the reserves.
Massively. They went in expecting maybe 200 Soviet divisions. What they actually encountered was closer to double that, and more kept appearing.
How many new units did the Soviets actually create in that initial period?
It's mind-boggling. Glantz and House document that by December 1941, despite catastrophic losses, Moscow had raised 194 new divisions and 84 separate brigades.
Wow, basically replacing the entire army they'd lost in the border battles.
Pretty much. And this was possible, as Glantz points out, because the Soviet Union in the 1930s had already undergone a kind of peacetime mobilization. They already had the structure and the raw manpower pool for the largest army in the world.
Just needed the time and will to call it up.
Exactly.
Okay, manpower is one thing, but you need weapons, tanks, planes. How did they keep the factories running when the Germans were overrunning places like Ukraine, their industrial heartland?
This is, I think, one of the most incredible stories of the war. The Great Industrial Evacuation.
Moving the factory?
Moving the factories. House, Mills, Glantz all describe this colossal undertaking. Over 1,500 industrial plants, mostly armament factories, were dismantled, packed onto trains, and shipped hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles east.
East, where to?
Beyond the Ural Mountains, into Siberia, Central Asia. Places completely out of reach of German bombers.
How many trains did that take?
The figure often cited is around 1.5 million rail cars.
1.5 million.
Often under air attack, in brutal weather conditions. The whole effort was managed by the State Defense Committee, the Stavka, the High Command, a supreme example of ruthless, centralized, totalitarian planning, achieving something extraordinary.
That's just staggering to contemplate. What were the strategic results of moving all that industry?
3 crucial things. First, obviously, it saved Soviet war production capacity, which ramped up significantly in 1942 and beyond.
Okay.
Second, it denied that industrial capacity to the Germans. They'd hoped to capture those factories intact and use them. Didn't happen.
Right.
And third, it put the new production centers deep in the strategic rear, safe from attack, guaranteeing a flow of T-34s, artillery, aircraft that the Germans simply couldn't stop and ultimately couldn't match.
So industry saved, manpower flowing.
Right.
But they still had that problem from the purges, inexperienced commanders. How did the Stavka adapt the structure of the Red Army to deal with that in 41?
They made some really drastic pragmatic changes. They simplified everything.
Simplified how?
Glantz and Mills describe this well. They realized the big, complex field army structures and the sophisticated mechanized corps were just too much for the new officers to handle effectively under fire, so they downsized. Field armies were made smaller. Rifle divisions were stripped down, their official strength cut from around 14,500 men to under 11,000. A lot of the specialized support units were removed and centralized at higher levels.
Making the division commander's job simpler?
Much simpler. And units that were badly mauled weren't always rebuilt as divisions. Often they were reformed as smaller, more manageable, separate rifle brigades, about 4,400 soldiers each. Easier to command, easier to supply.
Smaller building blocks.
Okay.
What about the tanks? The T-34s, the KVs? They were good tanks, but if the commanders couldn't use them effectively.
Right. So the sophisticated deep battle concepts, the independent armored spearheads, they were put on hold, temporarily shelved.
What did they do instead?
They broke up the large mechanized corps. Surviving tanks were reorganized into much smaller tank brigades, typically authorized around 91 tanks.
Okay. And their role?
Crucially, these tank brigades were usually subordinated directly to infantry commanders. Their job wasn't deep penetration anymore. It was direct support, helping the infantry hold the line or making small, local counterattacks.
So centralize the tanks, simplify their mission, take the complexity out of combined arms for the inexperienced leaders.
Exactly. It was a pragmatic solution born of desperation, but it helped stabilize the front by reducing the command burden.
And throughout all this chaos and adaptation, Stalin and the political leadership were making the big strategic calls.
Absolutely. And often, very harshly, front commanders were screaming for reinforcements, being pushed back everywhere. But Stalin, the Stavka, insisted on holding back large, fresh formations as strategic reserves. They refused to commit everything to stop the bleeding immediately.
Frustrating for the guys at the front, I bet.
Immensely. But House and Mills stress how vital this was. The ability to commit those untouched reserves, including fresh divisions, brought all the way from Siberia once they knew Japan wasn't attacking. That was absolutely decisive in halting the Germans at the gates of Moscow in December 41. It showed that despite the chaos, the central political control, the strategic direction, remained intact.
All right, let's jump forward. 1943, Stalingrad has happened, a huge turning point. The strategic initiative is really shifting, and the Germans know it. They plan one last massive offensive gamble in the east. Operation Citadel, aimed at the Kursk salient. Why was this bulge in the line such an obvious target?
Well, geography, really. The salient, this big bulge sticking into the German lines, just screamed pincer movement. It was a textbook opportunity for the Germans to try their classic maneuver, cut it off at the base, trap a massive Soviet force inside, and maybe, just maybe, regain the operational momentum.
Seemed like the logical place for them to try something.
It was, but then Hitler made a decision that proved, well, fatal for the operation. He delayed it.
Delayed Citadel. It was planned for the spring, right?
Planned for May, yes. But it didn't launch until July 5th. He held it up for nearly 2 months.
Why? Why give the Soviets, who must have known an attack was likely there, 2 extra months to prepare?
Technology. Hitler became fixated on waiting for his new generation of armored vehicles to arrive in sufficient numbers.
Ah, the new wonder weapon.
Exactly. The Tiger heavy tank, the new Panther medium tank, and the Elephant heavy tank destroyer. He believed these machines would give the German army an insurmountable technological advantage.
So he traded time for tech.
He did, and that 2-month delay was possibly the single greatest gift he could have given the Red Army. They used every single day.
To do what?
To build defenses. Not just trenches, miles upon miles of layered, deep, sophisticated anti-tank defenses. House describes it vividly. Multiple belts of minefields, anti-tank ditches, strong points, pre-registered artillery zones. They turned the entire bulge into a fortress in depth.
Okay, let's talk about those German super tanks. They were formidable on paper, weren't they? The Tiger.
Oh, the Tiger Panzer VI was terrifying to face. Thick armor, especially frontally, and the incredibly powerful 88mm gun.
Lethal.
But incredibly complex, expensive, and slow to build. They only managed to scrape together 178 Tigers for the entire Kursk offensive. Not enough to make a strategic difference across such a vast front.
Okay. What about the Panther? That was meant to be the answer to the T-34, wasn't it?
The Panther, Panzer V, was, in theory, an excellent design. Sloped armor like the T-34, powerful, long 75mm gun, good mobility, potentially the best tank of the war.
But again, there's a but.
A big but. Reliability. It was rushed into production to meet Hitler's Kursk deadline before all the kinks were worked out.
What kind of problems?
Engine fires, transmission failures, steering mechanism breakdowns. House mentions one Panther battalion reporting 25 engine failures in just 9 days at Kursk. Many broke down before they even reached the battle line, teething problems on a disastrous scale.
Not ideal when you're launching a make-or-break offensive. And the third one, the Elephant.
The Elephant, originally the Porsche Tiger prototype hull, mounted an even longer, more powerful 88mm gun, a superb tank killer at long range.
Sounds good. So what was its flaw?
It had no secondary armament, no machine gun for close-in defense against infantry.
Oh, that seems like a major oversight.
A fatal one in the close quarters fighting that inevitably happens when you're trying to break through dense defenses. Soviet infantry with anti-tank rifles or magnetic mines could just swarm them once they got close.
Guderian wasn't impressed, I gather.
Not at all. House quotes Guderian's scathing criticism about using hugely expensive 88mm shells, essentially, to swat the Soviet infantry, because the Elephants were helpless against them up close. The focus on high-tech specs ignored tactical reality.
So the Germans bring these new, powerful, but flawed and not numerous enough tanks. How did the Soviets respond? Did they try to build their own super tanks?
Not really. Their approach was different. They focused on what they did best, mass production, reliability, and finding simple, effective counters. They knew the Tiger was coming. They'd captured prototypes.
So what was their answer? More T-34s?
Lots more T-34s, yes. Continuously improving it, but keeping it easy to produce in huge numbers. But their specific answer to the new German heavy armor was ingenious in its speed and simplicity. The Su-152 self-propelled gun.
Su-152. How quickly did they develop that?
This is incredible. From identifying the need based on captured Tigers to rolling out the first prototypes. 25 days.
25 days. To design and build a counter to the Tiger.
Basically, yes. They took an existing heavy tank chassis, slapped a massive 152mm howitzer in a fixed casemate, and rushed it into production.
And it worked. A howitzer against a Tiger.
It wasn't a sniper rifle like the German 88, but the sheer explosive power of that huge 152mm shell. Even if it didn't penetrate the thickest armor, the impact, the concussion could wreck the tank. Crack welds, jam the turret, injure the crew. They nicknamed it Zierboy.
Which means?
Animal hunter or beast killer. A direct reference to the Tiger and Panther. It was a crude but brutally effective solution, produced quickly and in numbers.
So Soviet pragmatism versus German technological perfectionism.
Yeah.
But beyond the tank-on-tank duels, It was the overall scale that really decided Kursk, wasn't it? The sheer depth of the Soviet defenses.
Absolutely. The Germans were attacking into a meat grinder they couldn't possibly comprehend beforehand. They were actually outnumbered overall, which is fatal for an attacker who usually needs a 3-to-1 advantage or better.
What kind of numbers are we talking on the Soviet side?
Just in the two main fronts, defending the Bulge Central Front in the north, Voronezh Front in the south, the Soviets had marshaled something like 1.3 million men and over 3,500 tanks and self-propelled guns. Concentrated, dug in, waiting.
An incredible concentration of force.
And that wasn't even all of it.
There was more.
That was the real checkmate, the strategic reserve. The Stavka held back an entire additional army group, the Steppe Military District, soon renamed Steppe Front.
How big was that?
Another 573,000 men and over 1,600 tanks. Held back deliberately, ready to counterattack whichever German pincer seemed most dangerous, or to launch their own massive offensive once the Germans were exhausted.
And the Soviets knew exactly where this reserve was and when they'd use it.
Precisely. This sheer depth, this known concentration of force, completely negated the principles of German mobile warfare. There was no realistic possibility of achieving a deep, disorganizing breakthrough. They were hitting a wall, then another, and behind that was a whole fresh army waiting to punch back.
So even though the few Tigers and Panthers that were working racked up impressive kill counts tactically.
Yes, some sources estimate German tanks destroyed Soviet armor at maybe a 15-to-1 ratio in specific engagements.
It didn't matter strategically.
It didn't matter. The Germans bled irreplaceable machines and crews. Their quest for the perfect tank actually hurt their overall production. Fewer reliable Panzer V's were built because resources went to the complex Panthers and Tigers.
And losses at Kursk were crippling for the panzer troop.
Crippling. Maybe 600 tanks and 50 assault guns lost in 2 weeks. Not just the machines, but the experienced crews, the confidence. Hitler called off the offensive, evacuated the Orel salient soon after, and the Red Army launched its own massive counteroffensives. Kursk was the nail in the coffin for German offensive capability in the East. The Red Army had the initiative, and they would never lose it again. #Outtrautmann.
So wrapping this massive deep dive up, it really feels like the Soviet victory was this long, complex story, not just one thing.
Not at all. It's a convergence, isn't it? You see the theoretical brilliance of people like Isserson and Tukhachevsky in the 30s.
Right, the deep battle ideas.
Then the near collapse in 41, saved partly by German mistakes, those logistical failures Kershaw highlights, but also by sheer Soviet resilience. That incredible industrial move, the ability to just generate new divisions.
And the willingness to simplify, to adapt the army structure when the original plan failed.
Exactly. They had to learn the hard way. They shelved the complex deep operation temporarily, simplified things to survive 41 and 42.
But then they rebuilt.
They rebuilt massively. They achieved the industrial output, the numbers, and regained the command experience to finally execute those vast, sequential, deep offensives from 43 onwards. Kursk showed they could absorb the best the Germans could throw at them technologically.
And then crush it with depth and mass.
And well-coordinated counteroffensives. They ultimately mastered the operational art needed for that conflict.
It's a story of theory, failure, political adaptation, and finally, mastery achieved at immense cost.
Immense cost. Which brings us to a final thought, something maybe to leave you, the listener, mulling over.
Okay.
We talked about Tukhachevsky's strategy of annihilation Sokrushiny. It was ultimately the path the Red Army took to victory. But the sources, particularly those looking at the final year of the war as the Red Army pushed into Germany, they detail horrific, widespread violence, mass rape, looting, killing of civilians.
A very dark side to that victory.
A profoundly dark side. And it raises a difficult question, connecting back to the theory. Isserson talked about operational art serving just political aims. Tukhachevsky saw it as a tool for revolutionary war. But when you unleash a war of annihilation, total war aimed at the complete destruction and overthrow of the enemy state.
Can the soldiers carrying it out maintain any kind of moral boundary?
That's the question. Can the justness of the strategic goal, like defeating Nazism, survive the sheer scale of violence and dehumanization required by the operational method of total annihilation, especially when conducted on enemy territory?
A sobering thought indeed. Does the nature of the strategy itself inevitably lead to moral degradation on that scale?
It's something to consider. The relationship between the abstract concepts of operational art and the brutal human reality of executing it. A necessary, if uncomfortable, postscript to the story of military victory on the Eastern Front.